Saw 3 lacks any horror, terror, or fear. And basically what it all comes down to is that it's nothing but gore for the sake of gore.
I was like, 3 guys locked in a bathroom? Who makes a movie about 3 guys locked in a bathroom?
Hello my little demons, and welcome back to the channel. Saw X had a fantastic theatrical run, and it was just released on physical media, so what better time than now to deliver you my Saw deep dive. If you've never seen one of my deep dives, basically I go over the story of a franchise or of a director's career. I give you the basic gist of the story behind each film, and then I pull out all the most fun trivia and fun facts. I also pull in all the best interview clips and behind the scenes clips to give you the most well-rounded picture that I can. Consider this Saw for dummies. Like, if you're a mega fan and you've listened to every audio commentary, you know how every single trap was made, then maybe this isn't for you, but I do tend to surprise people with the stuff that I find. My dear devoted cult members know this. The cult of Haunted Hippie is strong, with many intellectuals who love basking in horror knowledge. If you're new here, I won't be calling you a subscriber, because the thing about following me is that I really need you to commit. I have anxious attachment issues. I need a little bit more reassurance. So if you would do me the honor of clicking subscribe and then handing your soul over to me, that would be great. I'll keep it safe and sound, maybe even nibble on it every now and then, and in exchange I provide all of this banging content to you for free, unless you have YouTube Premium, you high roller. I'll also need you to click the like button and the notification bell, that way you never miss our next meeting. Today's order of business obviously involves the biggest horror franchise of the early 2000s, Saw. Now, I've already gone over a ton of interview insights with James Wan, at least concerning the first film. You can find all of that and much more in my James Wan deep dive, but if you can believe it, there's a lot more to the story that we have to cover. Saw was Wan's first independent feature film right out of college. He and Leigh Whannell had no money to make a feature, and so they spent about a year working on the script. Something I didn't include in the James Wan deep dive is where some of Whannell's inspiration came from.
And so I went off to write it, and it just so happened that at the time I started writing the film, I was working a job I didn't like very much. All these things were happening. I think I was just suffering a little bit of stress, but it was manifesting itself physically. You know, I was grinding my teeth at night. I don't know if you've ever had that. I was getting these headaches, and of course you panic and you're like, I'm dying. Rush off to the doctor and had all these tests done. I was really worried. You know, I thought that something was wrong with me. You know, the tests all came back fine, and the doctor's like, you just need to relax. You need to, you know. And eventually I quit that job that I hated, which was the smartest thing. That was the best cure.
The test results elated him for a week, and that sort of bled into the script, the whole theme of really appreciating your life. I guess we have stressful adult jobs to thank for Saw being born. Without Lee hating his job that much, I don't know if the character of Jigsaw ever would have been written. But getting him written was less than half the battle, okay? After completing the script, they were still nowhere close to being able to make the movie.
We wanted to make a film, but we quickly realised that in Australia, it's a very small film industry. It's very hard to get films made, and mostly films are funded by the government to this day. We felt like we were so outside of that. We didn't know the right people. We didn't know anybody in the film industry. It felt like a club to us. Maybe that wasn't the way it actually was, but that was our perception. And so we decided if we were going to make a film, we'd have to make it ourselves with our own money.
That was something I never knew. I never knew about the Australian government and their involvement in their film industry. James and Lee were even considering selling the script to then make something else, because the fact that they were part of the package with James directing and Lee acting had cut the interest in the script in half. Leigh Whannell's manager was able to get them a meeting with an American production company, but they didn't want to travel out there empty-handed. Hence, the first movie in the franchise, Saw the short film. Scrapping together some money from friends and family, they were able to throw together this 10-minute long short. This depicts the classic bear trap scene, this time with Lee playing the victim. They used the exact same puppet from the short as they did in the first film, which was made by James Wan himself. And you can tell just from this shoestring budget short that they already had an idea of the stylization they wanted to incorporate into Saw. Everyone was gripped by the short film. A DVD of the short was sent out to everyone that they sent a script first two, including Cary Elwes. He hopped on board very shortly after the production company did, and then Lionsgate also followed suit. And within just a few months of that first meeting, they started to shoot Saw.
It was a really great cast, it was a cast that for a first-time director, for a kid, it was the most amazing thing, I was like, oh my god, I get to work with Danny Glover and I get to work with Mr. Elwes, Mr. Princess Bride, and so these were actors that I really looked up to over the years, and so the chance to work with them on my first movie was very exciting.
I can only imagine how exciting but nerve-wracking that must be, but both the boys said that Cary Elwes especially was so kind. He never made them feel like little kids or that they needed to learn from him. We also can't talk about the cast without discussing a one Tobin Bell. Why did he agree to become this most infamous character?
There were multiple reasons. The story, I was like, 3 guys locked in a bathroom? Well, it's Waiting for Godot. Who makes a movie about 3 guys locked in a bathroom? Number one. Number two, I had never worked with Danny Glover, and I wanted to do that. Number three, when I got to the moment when he gets up from the floor in the script, I had not anticipated that moment.
So true, bestie. I mean, who makes a movie about 3 guys in a bathroom that isn't gay porn? Although that's a whole thing we could get into if I ever did like a Saw iceberg, the Adam and Dr. Gordon shippers. What do you think, twinks or just a couple of guys being dudes? Something that surprised me about the cast of this movie is that Shawnee Smith originally did not want to do it. Not for any heartbreaking reason. I mean, she's not really a horror fan herself, but she just ended up getting really sick, and so she tried to back out of the film to no avail, luckily. You might also find this surprising as well.
Shawnee, everyone knows James had a big crush on Shawnee for a long time, so he's happy to work with her.
I know that was a super brief clip, might have been choppy, but I needed you to hear that from Lee's lips and not mine. I need that type of dirt and tea on people in the industry. Who had crushes? Who slept with who? Who hates who? It's important, because shit gets wild when you're making movies. They shot Saw in just 18 days. Surely some stuff went down, For example, there was a crazy injury on the first Saw where the DP smacked his head on a floorboard somehow. He was then sent to the hospital for the rest of the day, which I'm assuming means he came right back after that. In the making of documentary, Tobin Bell also details how he spent basically the entire shoot laying on the floor. That was part of his commitment to this role because he just felt like he wanted that final reveal to be as impactful and real as it possibly could be. There are a lot of jokes about how it looks like he's throwing it back here, but the movements came from a very real pain of this man in his 60s laying on the tile floor for almost the entirety of this shoot. Cary Elwes also got trapped in the bathroom for an entire lunch break one day, though that's not saying too much considering that we only get a 30-minute lunch break on union sets. And God bless whoever edited this moment of the documentary. I'm not going to touch it, I'm just going to let it play because the irony is beautiful.
We turn the blunt side of the hacksaw down, so Cary would actually be using that side to saw his foot. And literally you run a tube behind the blade, and basically from the tube you just pump blood into it, and that's all it was.
I did actually cut my leg when I did that, even though they blunted the hacksaw.
James is like, yeah, we blunted the saw, totally safe. Cut to Cary Elwes, like, yeah, the saw cut me. I don't know who edited the doc, but cheers, mate. The last of the BTS that I want to go over is covering the iconic traps. I know that's what you're here for, I could smell it. But I think we can agree the most iconic trap of the original film is the bear trap, come on. It was made from all real parts, and in order to get the effect of it snapping open, it was attached to a device with compressed air that someone off screen had to trigger.
This is the original, the one and only reverse bear trap. It still has Shawnee's hair stuck in it.
It's just unbelievable that for pretty much all of the first 7 Saw movies, the traps were all practical and the actors actually had to be in them. And it's no wonder why such a unique film absolutely popped off, but they went ham on the marketing nonetheless. They did a Red Cross Saw blood drive and they got a lot of blood donated, so promoting the movie and a good cause. They also had an amputee beauty pageant on the Howard Stern show. Lionsgate also held a bunch of test screening, and so this just lit a fire under the word of mouth marketing.
The 2 big festivals we went to were Sundance, and that was really scary. That was the first time we showed the film in a public place, and I couldn't even watch, I couldn't sit in the theatre. I was out in the foyer pacing around doing this. And then I think about 20 minutes in, someone walked out and started putting on their coat, and I was like, oh, I walk out, and she didn't know who I was, so I just said, oh, why are you leaving? She's like, oh, that's way too intense for me, man. And I was like, at least she's leaving because it's intense. At least she's not like, oh, I was falling asleep.
And fun fact, they finished the movie just 2 days before it screened there. Needless to say, this movie then became a box office smash and an instant classic with horror fans. On a budget of $1.2 million, it opened to 2,315 theaters. In its first weekend, it made over $18 million and finished its worldwide run with $103 million Remember, in the early 2000s, the DVD market was booming. This was its literal peak. So on the back end with DVD sales, they made a whole bunch of different kind of like specialized DVDs. They made over $70 million in DVD sales, over $20 million then in DVD and VHS rentals, and it has also likely made millions in Blu-ray and 4K sales ever since. The money talks, but so do critics, and as is par for the course, they didn't like it. Let's check in with Roger Ebert, who, lunatic that he was, rated movies out of 4 stars instead of 5. I've covered a lot of reviews in the past, and I always thought that he was rating things out of 5, so I would think, oh, he's kind of harsh. Because who in their right minds rates things out of 4, but whatever. He gave the movie 2 stars and said Saw doesn't cut it as a thriller. Saw, by contrast, depends on an improbably devious and ingenious villain who creates complications for the convenience of the screenplay. Named the Jigsaw Killer, he joins that sturdy band of movie serial killers with time on their hands to devise elegant puzzles for their victims and the police. Sometimes that works, as in The Silence of the Lambs, and sometimes we simply feel toyed with. That said, Saw is well made and acted and does what it does about as well as it could be expected to. Horror fans may forgive its contrivances. You silly horror fans and your willingness to accept mediocrity. The most infamous critical line of thinking that Saw birthed is the whole concept of torture porn.
As a term, I think it's just something that the media comes up with for a shorthand. You know, I've worked for magazines before, and you're always looking for shorthand, like what's the most direct way to into somebody's conscious. In the same way, a term like grunge or, you know, whatever you're talking about, it's something that you can use to symbolize something and instantly get the message across.
It makes me happy that they don't seem to really internalize that too much, because they know that this shorthand is how things get overblown, and it's not representative of their first film. Because, mama, that Rotten Tomatoes score? I thought that Saw was a more socially accepted horror film, but I guess not. A 50% critical rating is just not what I was expecting, but that 84% audience rating makes a lot of sense. And I know that I bring this up a lot in my reviews, but the fact remains that critics are willfully obtuse when it comes to horror. I remember kind of recently someone left a comment that was like, you can't tell critics not to review horror just because they don't like it. Yes, I can. When they blatantly avoid or disregard empirical evidence just to make their point because of their bias against horror, yes, I can. These are from official critics on Rotten Tomatoes. A contrived, unlovable gore fest with a high concept premise. Blood splatter antics take over and make it a tough watch for the queasy and those who still consider themselves sane. If you're looking for a genuinely scary movie, keep looking, because Saw isn't it. Sadistic, yes. Gory, yes, but not scary. Can the class take a guess why I cherry-picked these specific reviews? If you were thinking, that's weird that they cite this as a gore fest when there's hardly any blood to be found in the movie, then ding ding, we have a winner! A gold star for you, my pupil. How has everyone just collectively learned nothing from the release of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre in 1974? That came out exactly 30 years before Saw. Everyone hyped it up like, oh, so gory, so horrible, everybody getting chainsawed to death. And there's like 2 drops of blood in that movie. If we don't educate ourselves, then history is bound to repeat itself. So yeah, I'm gonna call out these dumbass reviews. Because it's like, did you watch the movie? Not that it really matters to us, because critics getting upset is a major selling point for us freaks. I don't want anyone to get the wrong idea that I put a lot of value into what critics say, but that doesn't mean that we have to take this stuff lying down. I think it's embarrassing to call yourself a critic when, like, critic implies critical thinking, does it not? When you willfully ignore facts, willfully spread misinformation about a movie, and most importantly, willfully disregard the intentions of a filmmaker when you are critically reviewing their work. And that's a dead horse that I'm sure I'll keep pulling out to beat, even though it doesn't even matter because money talks, baby.
The film came out on a Friday, and by Monday the sequel was announced.
I wish that I was old enough at that time to be swept up by the Saw hype, to know that for the next 6 years straight, I would be getting a Saw movie every year like clockwork. What a time that must have been to be alive. I was alive, to be clear, but I was small. Though it didn't really create much of an atmosphere to get a lot of creator insight, surprise, surprise. Luckily, I did find the making of documentary online. This film was handed off to Darren Lynn Bousman, who had previously directed a short horror film which apparently impressed Lionsgate. He doesn't specify the name of it in his interview, but I found this short called Butterfly Dreams. It's on IMDb. It was a short that he directed as a student, but there's barely any information about it online. So new director, but they had the same cinematographer behind the camera, David A. Armstrong. You also know the returning actors, and Shawnee was a little bit more excited for this one.
When they asked me to do the second one, I was thrilled, even though I still don't like to be scared.
She gets some of the best twists of the franchise in this one. Though would you consider the needle pit a twist? Even if you don't, I think it's probably the most iconic scene of this movie, except, well, maybe the reveal. But it's one of the most iconic scenes of the entire franchise. So let's talk about it. The pit was lined with foam on the sides and underneath, and they took the needles out of the syringes to be replaced with fiber optic tips. It took 120,000 needles to achieve this effect and a few buckets of slime so that she could actually move around in the pit.
No! Oh, that needle pit was just so much fun. I just loved it.
She's so chipper about it, and usually I'm all for doing weird stuff with my body on set. It was a secret dream of mine to be a stunt woman. But 120,000 syringes, and you mean to tell me that not a single needle slipped through the cracks? I would have had to have oversight on the props department because I'm just not a very trusting person. Despite everyone on the shoot obviously going through a lot and being covered in sticky fake blood every day, everyone seemed to have a really good time.
This is Billy. Billy and I have been seeing each other and hanging out every night. At the end of the day, I go home and I go back to the hotel, and it's so great. And we make sweet puppet love.
In this movie, we no longer get to see the original puppet, but rather several different animatronics. You can see that he was controlled via remote, so they definitely stepped up the budget a little bit. Not remarkably so, but they did up it to $4 million for this movie, and does that make anyone else wonder? Why do these other, dramas and comedies that don't require any type of special effects or anything get these massive budgets, and then you can make Saw 2, which is breathtaking, for only $4 million? That turned into nearly $148 million in the box office. And I was shocked and horrified to learn how this movie was received, because I consider it to be one of the top 3 of the franchise. Look at both the critical and the audience score on Rotten Tomatoes. This makes no type of sense to me. To enjoy Saw 2, one must have enjoyed Saw. This is a given. As to which is better, this is a fairly pointless question given how bad both of these movies are. The New York Times wasn't big on it either, but was a little bit less harsh. By the time the final twists start exposing themselves and the title tool makes a welcome cameo appearance, it's fully apparent that the sequel is more trick than treat and doesn't really compare to its fine predecessor, though it still manages to be eye-opening and sometimes positively nauseating in itself. Now let's fast forward to the present with what really matters, the Letterboxd score. With 417,000 reviews, it sits at a 3.1, which is not bad at all. Obviously, none of this matters because of that big fat box office that I mentioned, so of course we got Saw 3.
It's almost like a new model that they're testing out, just getting things out like that. And it can be really daunting at first, having someone tell you, okay, you've got 2 months to write it because then we need to start shooting. But you get into the spirit of it. And in a lot of ways, the creative side of me hates the fact that we're making one of these films a year, which means it's such a rush. But on the other side, it's just a new way of doing things. I think the fans really love the fact that they can expect one of these Saw films, now.
And the cash doesn't suck.
The cash is all right, I guess.
At this point of the franchise, Leigh Whannell is still writing, but this would be his last time writing for this franchise. As you can tell, he's not really a fan of the model for the franchise, saying that it was something new. But that's not true, babes. Friday the 13th was operating under the exact same model for the first 6 years of that franchise. 1980 through 1986, they were just going. They only took a break in 1987 and continued in 88 and 89. Yeah, things got more spaced out after that, but I'm just saying Leigh Whannell did not do his history homework. That to say, there's no real story behind the scenes of how did this franchise keep continuing, who got hired. So I'm not getting into that in detail. It's because of money. Are we good with that? Okay, good. Lionsgate keeps the circle tight, and so naturally Darren Lynn Bousman was directing again. Kevin Greutert, who edited the first 2 movies, is still editing. David A. Armstrong is still DPing. They did try to veer in a slightly different direction with this one, though.
I've tried to stay away from just having it be an amped up version of Saw 2. And I think that the direction it goes in, I believe, is that it's much more emotionally intense. You're concentrating on the relationship between Jigsaw and his new apprentice.
A great choice that I feel like they walk back on a little bit by the end of the movie and kind of back themselves into a corner there. Why would you kill the stars of a franchise when it's in its infancy? Granted, Saw 4 would not be greenlit until after the release of Saw 3, so there's always that bit of doubt. But when said stars are so devoted to the material and do it so well, why would you kill them off?
You find out a lot about Jigsaw's relationship with Amanda. You begin to sense how important she is to him, not just as a gopher, but as someone who swims in his sea, someone who's a like being. I have groups of 15 to 25-year-olds walk up to me with their skateboards and say, "You're the guy. "You're Jigsaw?" And I say, "Yeah, I am." And they say, "We love those Saw films, man. We just love them." I say, "What do you love about them?" And they say, "We love them because they're just so scary and everything, but then they teach us stuff." I said, "Well, what do you mean by that?" And they said, "Well, like when you say to Detective Matthews, if you knew the exact moment of your own death, how would you live your life differently?" And the fact that 15 to 25-year-olds are thinking about that stuff, to me, is interesting. We don't answer a lot of questions there, but if the fact that the questions that we're asking are food for thought for such a broad range of young people, to me means we're doing something.
Not only does he understand his character to a T, which I will share more insight on later on, but he understands the allure for fans on a philosophical level. Something that I'm not even sure the producers really grasped. John, I get why he had to go because they set him up as this terminal cancer patient. Amanda? Shawnee Smith could have kept that franchise going for eons, but I will get too heated if I start talking about it. I'm just saying there's a reason why they went back to that for Saw X. Let me stop. Let's move on. What do you think of when you think of Saw 3? I'm gonna take a guess that it might be the pig vat. With this crazy, iconic, nasty scene, they only had a 16-day turnaround to craft these nasty pigs, so big round of applause to the effects team for pulling that off. They were made of foam and rubber latex and coated with real maggots. Not only are maggots flying everywhere, they have no time to get this shot done. That poor actor is being covered in pig guts. Well, the fake guts was made of milk, chocolate pudding, and Nutella, so that actually sounds kind of delicious, but that would be sticky icky. I wouldn't want to be laying in that all day. While all of that is going on, Bousman is having a blast.
I can help you! Now. This is a long, big one now. So much fun.
I also wish that more directors had done what he did for this film and Saw 4, where he actually vlogged the experience before vlogging was even a thing. They're called Darren's Video Diaries, and they have a lot of good BTS in them. Everything, as always, is linked in the resource master post down below. We'll pick back up with him in a minute, though. Let's talk about the reception to this film. With a budget of $10 million and 27 days to shoot the film, it went on to gross over $164 million in the box office. It remains the highest grossing Saw film of all time, and that's with inflation today. It only received a 29% critical score on Rotten Tomatoes, but this is far from the lowest of the franchise. It's also surprising to me that its audience score is so much higher than Saw 2, because when you talk to most Saw fans, I would say the majority of them would put Saw 2 over Saw 3 any day of the week. One of the most sadistic, brutal, grisly films of the current splatter genre. No one will ever be able to accuse series creators and scribes Lee Whannell and James Wan of being stingy with the red stuff, but who cares what critics have to say when I found a genuine YouTube review from 17 years ago.
Saw 3 is both better and a whole lot worse than the other Saw films in two different ways. It's better than the other Saw films in the sense that its basic story and idea is a little bit more sophisticated than Saws 1 and 2. Now, considering the amount of sophistication in Saws 1 and 2, that's not really saying much. Saw 3 lacks any horror, terror, or fear. And basically what it all comes down to is that it's nothing but gore for the sake of gore.
That's an ancient text right there. Isn't it also crazy how critics and reviewers think that they come off all smart when they're like, well, the plot was not very sophisticated. The whole time there's a completely non-linear and layered progression of different twists that you have to focus on pretty hard to understand the full picture. You let me down, random dude from 17 years ago, you let me down. So let's move on, let's get out of here.
Everybody knows that we've always tried to keep things confidential here, hence your names on the script, signing for them, taking back the pages that go out.
Someone closely involved with production is leaking information, stuff that no one should know. Obviously for us, that's not good.
Ugh, show us the response. We want the drama. Unfortunately, the vlog cuts to the next scene immediately after that, so we never know who the rat was. That was a big issue with Saw because by this point, they knew that they were going to keep pumping them out. They would drop little hints and clues in the movie so that they could retroactively actually give them meaning, like this letter Amanda reads in Saw 3. The issue with that is that leaks can happen, especially on major productions like Saw. Saw 4, of course, sheds some very new light on characters like Detective Hoffman and Jill Tuck. We were also introduced to Detective Strom, the hottie from Gilmore Girls. Here's a little insight from Betsy Russell on what it was like to play Jigsaw's wife.
You know, he's very intense. When I got to Toronto to start, before I started filming, he just said, we're really going to get to know each other, okay? And I was like, oh, how close? And he was like, look what I wrote you. And he wrote me a poem, and he gave me gifts, made me listen to his favorite songs,
As we get more into the methodology of Tobin Bell, this will sound so normal. Like, he's basically John Kramer now. And as far as I could tell in my research, this is the first time that he really broke down the character when doing press for Saw 4.
He's multifaceted, he's technically oriented, interested in classical literature, classical music, the great works. He's a guy who thinks the world is going to hell in a handbasket because it's no longer survival of the fittest, it's become survival of the mediocre.
After this point, any interviewer that asks him that same question over and over gets the same response. I'll show another clip later on where he has really just perfected his answer to that question, because everyone always asks the same thing, and I'm like, get some new material. Eventually it evolves into, so why do you keep returning to this role? I'm sick of journalists not doing their research. Get it together. Anyway, once we get to Saw 4, the BTS is a lot more lackluster. I think because at this point they knew they didn't need to do a lot to sell these movies to audiences. It mostly consists of Darren's vlogs, and we get a few bite-sized interviews. So I'm not going to dive into any of the specific traps, I'll just show you a few clips of everyone having a really good time.
This is the links that I go to for my actors. Yeah, there you go. Costas has a crazy rider in his contract that he wants to be stuffed animals in every shot. It's like his protective blanket. It's a fetish. The camera department has a fart machine, and it's been an ongoing joke that every year we hide the fart machine somewhere in the set, and during a take it'll go off and see how long the actor can maintain their composure. Can't be broke. It's still farting.
Nothing but maturity on the sets of this franchise, Before watching these, though, I never knew that Costas Mandylor was Australian. Did you? Unfortunately, the good on-set vibes did not translate to the audience reaction. Yet again, they had $10 million to make this movie, and it raked in about $140 million, but that critical response, ooh, mama. With an 18% on Rotten Tomatoes, it is still not the critically lowest rated movie of the franchise, but it does have a higher audience score than Saw 2. Again, this does not make sense to me. I have done Saw rankings now twice on my channel, and in neither video did I get a single comment of someone saying that they enjoyed Saw 4 more than Saw 2. Like, be fucking for real, Rotten Tomatoes, cite your sources. This gruesomely efficient horror sequel shows noticeable wear and tear. Torture, you may recall, used to be an unparsable, unpardonable sin. Now it's At least in previous entries, we could follow the conflict. Here we're lost in a garbled display of over-editing and flashy direction. But again, who cares? Let's find out what the real people think. Unfortunately, I could not find a timely review of this movie, but I did find one that was a decade old from a channel called Spill Audio. This was uploaded December 21st of 2013.
Even as someone who likes horror and gore, the Saw series kind of ran its course with the last movie. The stories are starting to get kind of silly and stupid, and honestly, sadistic torture in movies just for the sake of entertainment, and that's kind of starting to disturb me.
I know that I find the most random bullshit to share with you guys, but that video is a decade old. That's history right there. It still reflects the attitudes of at least some people of the time, so I think it's still relevant. Saw 4 is one of my least favorites of the franchise, so I can't really blame him there, so let's move on to bigger and better things.
Freaking me out. No, seriously, that's a person's body. I know, because there's no way someone's moving like that.
Saw 5 is where, once again, it is slim pickings in terms of finding any good interview insights or good behind the scenes. What I can tell you is that after 3 movies, Darren Lynn Bousman decided to step away, meaning this entry was directed by David Hackle, but Charlie Clouser is still scoring, David A. Armstrong is still the DP, Kevin Greutert is still editing. Like I said, not much to get into here. We can talk about a couple of the traps. Like the pendulum trap, they hit hid his real body beneath the table with his shoulders and head sticking out, and they placed an airbag on the table that someone would manually breathe into to simulate him breathing, which is pretty cool. But my favorite trap is the water box though, or I guess they call it the cube, where Strom is stuck drowning until he jabs his own pen into his neck. He would have to hold his breath for up to a minute sometimes because it was all practical. He really was all up in that water. He would have to use a snorkel to breathe between takes. Finally, one last fun fact. As you know, we have to say goodbye to our beloved Detective Strom in this installment. The coffin trap is pretty iconic. In my opinion, it's a good twist. And yeah, I'm biased. I love Saw 5. I love the relationship between Detective Strom and Detective Hoffman. I think it's so underrated. But Scott Patterson did not know that he was dying in the ending of the movie until they requested that he go get a cast of his arm done. They really kept actors in the dark to, like I said, prevent leaks, but it meant that they would sadly be blindsided by their characters passing away in the franchise. This was actually the most expensive Saw trap to date. Originally they wanted to fill it with water, but logistically they just could not figure that out. It had practical movable walls, they made a replica of Strom's arm, like I said, and the coffin was full of rubber glass so Costas could lay in it safely. At this point, I don't know if I just couldn't find them, but I don't think that we really got any marketing interviews. I think that Lionsgate and Twisted Pictures was just like, one came out last year and we had everyone go on a press tour. I think that we're probably good this year. We can pick it back up again next year. They were right. I mean, the budget for this movie was about $10.8 million, roughly the same as the last few films. And this movie went on to gross over $118 million worldwide. This one, however, is one of the most low-rated critically. It has a 13% on Rotten Tomatoes. Even worse than Saw 4, but still not the worst of the franchise. Let's react to snotty reviews. Saw 5 is a terrible combination, grisly and tedious. Let's just call it bloody dull. I read that in a British accent because I think that she's probably British. Even the most diehard of Saw fans won't credit how tedious, lame, and pointless this fourth sequel manages to be. Saw 5 isn't anywhere close to the best Saw movie, but it makes the entire series coalesce a little bit better. Okay, Peter Hartlob. And again, I know that some people don't understand why I read critical reviews if I don't put any stock into them, but for a long time, critical reception actually meant something to people. I think only recently, with the rise of the movie review YouTuber and Letterboxd, that people finally realized that critics are just full of shit, or they're failed filmmakers themselves. Back in the day, it was like, wow, somebody has the credentials to put a piece out in the newspaper. Now it's like, oh, okay. I mean, anybody can share their opinions. I also find it really interesting what they had to say because it reflects a certain social attitude of the era. Believe it or not, if you stepped out of your own little horror bubble on the internet, like, you know, you stepped out of your algorithm and people like me did not show up on your YouTube homepage, what critics were saying is probably unfortunately what most normies still think about the franchise. So while we don't agree, and they are silly, it's still relevant cultural history and I like being well-rounded. Which also means that I found a Saw 5 review from 2008 on YouTube.
Overall, I enjoyed the movie. I enjoyed it a lot more than Saw 4, which was a bit too much of a mind job for me. You know, there's some creaky acting and story moments, of course, but overall with the traps, the kills, all that stuff, I'm going to give it 3 out of 5 stars because I thought on that level it delivered what fans wanted.
I was surprised to see such a positive review from the IGN movie editor, especially when his fellow critics were dogging on it. But on that positive note, we get to move on to the best movie of the entire franchise.
So I look forward to continuing to develop that character in a way that impresses me. I truly expect that we've got a ways to go.
That's right, Saw 6 is the only undisputed perfect film of this franchise. Argue with the wall, okay? And also at this point, Tobin Bell was like a freaky witch that could see the future. He and I have that in common, actually. Even in 2009, he knew that we would be talking about him in 2023. This was also the first movie where longtime editor Kevin Greutert got to step in as the director.
Kevin Greutert has been the editor of the Saw films since Saw 1. So the rapid montage that you see at the end that ties all the clues together and the feeling of the films as a whole, the texture of the films, the coloring of the films is all in Kevin's hand. He has been the
the guy who puts it all together.
In a franchise as twisty and flashbacky as this one, who better to step into the director's chair than the man who spent hours in the dark piecing it all together? He had been advocating for himself as a director since the release of the first movie. He even directed his own short horror film around that time. So I don't know why he didn't get to step in when Bousman stepped down, but luckily we got him to direct Saw 6. He had described his desire for this film to feel like one man's journey through a moral test. He feels that that's where this franchise works best, so I have a feeling if you asked him, his favorite of the franchise would be Saw 3. I think structurally it's definitely the most similar to 6. He also felt that it would be best to bring in a new main character, hence why we got the amazingly terrible William, played by Peter Outerbridge, who has a little bit of insight that I want to share, but apologies. The only clip that I could find of this interview has Hungarian subtitles. I don't know why.
I grew up on horror movies back in the 80s when the slasher franchise industry really, hit full swing. And I was studying theater school, but I loved going to see slasher flicks. I don't know why, it just appealed to me. I like roller coasters and scary things. And so I've been following this franchise because I think it's just fantastic. And when I had the opportunity to jump on board, I was like, absolutely, I'll be in a Saw movie. I think they're great.
I think that it always benefits a film to have actors that know the material and that are excited to be there. I think that even though Saw 6 does get its flowers, he is still one of the more underrated characters of the franchise. Not because we like him, but just because it's amazing to watch the logic that he used to deny people healthcare just crumbling in his eyes. Shawnee Smith also returned, and we got some insight to her method that no one had really shared before.
There was very little talking to her because, as a director, you don't want to say too little because actors need encouragement, but I got the sense that you don't even go there. Like, I might have said one or two words to her and she would shake her head a little bit, but she was vibrating in the character of somebody going through heroin withdrawal in between takes. It was kind of disturbing.
It's really tricky walking the line of not over-directing, and I empathize with this. These are the best kind of actors that just show up and know the material. I've worked with some actors where sometimes the shot is not even a close-up or a medium, like it's a wide shot. And you'll have an actor that will interrupt you, like while you're talking to the DP, you're setting up or whatever. And they'll be like, wait, before we go, what's my motivation in this scene? Like, where am I looking? What am I doing? Dude, do the work. You know your character. Why do I gotta hold your hand in a scene where you don't even have any lines? On the other hand, I've worked with actors that need no direction. They just come on and they command the screen. Sounds like that's the type of gal that Shawnee Smith is, and our old boy Tobin Bell. This being the 6th film of the franchise, they had really gotten to develop their characters at this point and make it something special.
Obviously, I'd love for it to be the best of all, but it's hard to surprise the audience at this point. But what I do really want is for it to be an emotional journey that the audience will be compelled to follow in its own right as a story, as opposed to what's the next trap going to be.
And he did just that. I'm sorry, but a 39% critical rating and a 48% audience rating. Sadly, it's still the 3rd highest critically rated movie of the franchise, so I guess I can't stay mad. And on a budget of $11 million, it went on to make $70 million in the box office, and the reviews are not as bad as they once were. Saw 6 is, pardon the pun, a cut above the rest, but not sadly by much. Don't have a desire to see victims ripped limb from limb, cut in half, and watch their insides spill out onto the floor? Avoid Saw 6 at all costs. Now this one is disappointing because Perry is one of my favorite interviewers, right there next to Jake's Takes. There were some positive critic ratings though, including this one. Saw 6 proves to be the one to pull the series out of its tailspin. Film number 6 is not only good, it's really good. By the way, did you notice that this is written by C. Robert Cargill, writer of the Sinister movies, Doctor Strange, and The Black Phone? Funny seeing you here on a 2009 review of Saw 6. Look, the girls that get it, get it. It will probably always be at the top of my Saw ranking.
Is this really the end?
Yes, it is.
It is. We've been assured by the producers that this is it.
Jigsaw died 4 movies ago and he's still around.
I killed him.
I think it's best to finish on a high note.
Especially doing the 3D and everything. I think that's a good way to go.
It's going to be such a fun film to finish it off with. We're very excited.
This is the end of the Saw series with Saw 3D. We really wanted to go out with a bang. I think we've told the story and done a great job wrapping it all up.
More on that later. Saw 7, I don't know if it's been renamed in the canon now to be Saw the Final Chapter, chapter. I've seen posters that say Saw 7, I've seen posters that say Saw 3D, and Saw the final chapter. Real identity crisis on this one. In the words of James Wan and Lee Wanell, they wanted to finish on a high note with 3D. Bit of an oxymoron there, but 'twas a sign of the times. Everyone was done, except for Tobin Bell. It's a shame that people write this movie off because the press for it, you guys, let me just play a little highlight reel of Tobin Bell's best moments.
Well, hold on to your seat because you won't be able to control what you're in for. You won't be able to intellectualize it. It will take you over.
Do strangers confuse you with the character of Jigsaw?
Yes, and they ask me to dance. They don't confuse me, no. The people who see these films have a real sense of humor. Surprisingly, they don't take the films anywhere near as seriously as the people who don't see the films. In Saw 3, there are some pigs that fall from the sky into a vat, and in the vat is a judge. I thought that was incredibly inventive and visually stunning. So I like that trap a lot.
What would you say is your biggest fear, personally?
My biggest fear?
Mm-hmm.
The stupidity of human beings, I think, scares me more than anything.
I told you guys that he is John Kramer. I don't know if he always has been, but he certainly is now. It's just one of those totally kismet, perfect casting moments, and he's still crushing it 7 years later. And then 20 years later, he's crushing it even harder. Like, we do not deserve Tobin Bell. To this day, he's still so dedicated to his character and always has been. Costas Mandylor has a fun little story to this point.
The scariest thing that's happened to me was Tobin, Mr. Jigsaw, had a problem with the scene, and the day before we shot it, he called me in my room at 12 at night, and he said, "Are you up?" And I said, "Yeah, what do you want?" "I have a problem with the scene, come to my room." That was scary.
You're gonna get a lot of me kissing Tobin Bell's ass in this video, and that's just the way that it is. Real recognizes real. And I recognize that this movie is fun, okay? Hate it all you want. I think the original 7 movies, that original series, is great, including this movie. It's so much fun, and I think that once you kind of detach yourself from the quality of the other films, you realize that Kevin was put in a tough spot being forced to shoot this in 3D. You realize that a Saw movie being this goofy can be fun, and just roll with it. Dr. Gordon back from the graves and back into our lives all of a sudden? Okay.
This film is definitely for the fans in that regard. There are a lot of lingering story issues that even after Saw 6 have been debated and up in the air for the hardcore fans of the series.
Yes, exactly, Kevin, thank you. Is this the most contrived Saw movie in existence? Probably, but y'all wanted it. Although we finally have arrived at the lowest rated Saw movie of the franchise, that's right. Coming in hot with a 9% critical rating and an audience score of 41%, it's also the lowest audience score. Saw 3D may just be the sawiest Saw film of them all. It's the kitchen sink chapter. Like a stumpy limb requiring quick cauterization via steam pipe, our first cringe, the Saw series is begging for closure. You know, do I read some of these reviews just to mock them? Yeah! It's so funny how a movie getting terrible reviews in the name of torture porn or whatever is like a calling card for us horror fans. When I hear that a movie is disgusting people like this, I'm like a bloodhound. Gotta sniff it out immediately. Saw fans got on this movie regardless. On a budget of $17 million, it went on to gross about $136 million in the box office. And I like this movie a lot. Saw 4 is not bad, but it just veers a little bit more on the boring side. It doesn't really engage me. At least Saw 7 has the balls to be so thoroughly ridiculous that I remain entertained. Speaking of ridiculous, there was a 2011 panel where a few of the cast members reunited. This included Shawnee Smith, Costas Mandylor, and Carrie Elwes. This is just a brief sidebar to talk about how insane a lot of us Saw fans are, because at one point in the middle of this panel, somebody proposed.
Chase, stand up. Everybody, round of applause. He's gonna talk to his girl about something. Will you marry me? Yes?
Then I don't know if one of them was pregnant or something, but Shawnee and Carrie had some really interesting advice.
We're so happy that you said yes. If it's a girl, I want her named Amanda.
Try and find a doctor named Gordon to deliver the baby.
Inject this shit straight into my veins, okay? Then, and it's funny to look at this 12 years later, Costas goes on to talk about his hopes and dreams if he ever returns to the franchise.
There's 2 things that I haven't done. I haven't gotten revenge on Dr. Gordon, and I haven't kissed Shawnee Smith. They're my two objectives.
In the year of our Antichrist, 2023, we have a new Saw film with both of those characters returning and neither of those dreams realized. I think that's a shame. Also, it's been 12 years since this panel. Did that couple end up naming their child Amanda? Or if it was a boy, did they name it Dr. Gordon? Like, we need to know. I feel entitled to know. Unfortunately, that does end my coverage on the original Saw series. Now it's time to move into reboot territory.
Want to just make another Saw movie. So we really revamped this as far as the look, color, the sound, a lot of new characters.
This is where things obviously get different because they intentionally put a different kind of feel on the movie from the original series. They made it very modern and kind of shiny and full of CGI for some reason. A few familiar names. Charlie Clouser is still doing the music because let's face it, nobody else can. Hello Zepp is everything to me. James and Lee are still executive producers, but let's be real, they're just investors. They know that there's a good payout on the other end. Michael and Peter Spierig are two Australian brothers that are at the helm directing this installment. I don't know if they're twins, but what is it with Australia producing horror director twins? Just like Michael and Danny Philippa from Talk to Me. Oh my god, and both sets of brothers even have one named Michael. That's too much. Anyways, a lot of new faces on this one, and it feels like a very different movie. I mean, not only did they modernize it by finally shooting it in a wider ratio, they also took a 7-year pause on the franchise, which hopefully would have given them a new angle.
And every now and then we'd kind of call each other up and say, you know, should we do another one? And we couldn't come up with a good idea.
Yeah, or that. There's truly nothing to this movie, and like a lot of the traps are CGI, so there's not a lot of fun behind the scenes either, which is boring, and they actually used lines like this.
No, it's not creepy at all.
Which is boring and embarrassing. The most cliche, unfunny line of dialogue of all time. That is the line that I use as an example when I'm talking about the most cliche, unfunny lines of dialogue. See also, guys, you're gonna want to see this, or he's standing right behind me, isn't he? They did give us Logan, which, hands up, I enjoy him as a character. He's more or less a copy-paste of Hoffman, just with a little bit more self-control. Though I don't really consider his whole prequel storyline to be canon, I just can't. John Kramer was one of the only good things this movie gave us, however brief. But luckily, we have so many unhinged interview moments from him that I don't even know if I'll be able to share them all. We'll start with the more basic, less crazy stuff. So this is a little highlight reel of him talking about getting into the mindset of John Kramer and like his motivations.
He's a big guy. You know, he's got a huge dimension as a character. He's a bit of a philosopher, a bit of a theologian, a trained mechanical engineer, an architect. He reads a lot. He has a multiplicity of interests. He's kind of Lear-like in his dimension. You're talking about John's psychological process. I ask myself a series of questions. What does he mean by what he says? I ask myself, who am I? Where am I? What do I want? When do I want it? And how am I going to get it? I ask myself that in every single situation, and I answer those questions. And there's always a very simple logic, although someone may behave in a sort of strange way. If you carefully examine even the most illogical kind of behavior, there's a simple logic to it. And I always want to know what I mean by what I say, and that can get very, very detailed. First question, where am I? All right, so that's the first question. It's at the bottom of an inverse triangle, and so I say, where am I? And I go, Portland, Oregon. I'll just pick a place. All right. So there's the answer, but that opens up two questions. What part of Portland? Downtown Portland? Suburban Portland? That opens up 4 questions. 4 becomes 8, 8 becomes 16, 16 becomes 32. By the time you shoot, you'd haven't answered all the questions. But hopefully you've answered enough. I've answered enough so that I don't go mad playing.
Are you Jigsaw in real life?
Of course.
As you can see, by 2017, John Kramer had consumed Tobin Bell. He stole his life and now wears Tobin Bell as a skin suit. He also had to answer the question of why he came back to the franchise so many times during this press tour. I feel bad for him. He answered it the exact same every time, and good for him. Lionsgate, if you ever need me to interview Tobin Bell, I promise I will come at him with some fresh material. What also fascinated me is how he talks about engaging with the fans.
I think that the concepts in the film resonate with people, and I think they particularly resonate a concept like appreciating your life and not taking things for granted. That's a simple one. Skateboard kids approach me and talk about ideas in the film. They don't talk about this trap or this thing. I've had them say they teach you stuff, and I'm like, wow.
Tobin, my man, sticking up for your people. We love to see it. People who don't actually engage with the franchise or the fandom probably think that we're all just gore hounds who love the traps. Obviously, torture porn gets thrown around a lot, but I love that Tobin Bell stops that train of thought in its tracks and gives credit to the fans' intelligence and to the deeper subtext of the films. He did do some interviews back during the Saw 4 press tour.
And you're in the next 7 movies.
Twin
brother?
No.
Oh no, you told us you didn't have that already.
They're not going that route. They're not going that route with it. No. No twin brother.
Okay. I think we have to get out of here because they want to go. So they just told us a couple questions, and that's pretty good. That was all I needed to know. So it was nice seeing you again.
The interviewer awkwardly laughing like, try not to cringe challenge failed. If you're going to be interviewing Tobin Bell, you better be ready to lead the conversation, talk philosophy, and critically analyze those films. To conclude, since the press for the movie was far more interesting than any of the behind the scenes, I'm just going to conclude with 2 of my favorite, most unhinged moments. Number 1, Tobin Bell talking about James Wan's height.
James Wan, who created the original one, is about this tall and very mild-mannered and very sweet guy, and that this comes out of his head is is amazing.
I don't know if he realizes how badly he cooked James Wan there, or if he knows and just doesn't care. Number 2, they sent Tobin Bell, at that time 75 years old, through the Halloween Horror Nights Saw maze.
Whoa! Billy, my friend. I love you, brother. I can't fucking deal with that shit. I want to let this poor bastard out.
How do you feel? How was it?
Fucking terrifying. Can you use that?
Universal keeps this really hush-hush, but people die in their parks like all the time. And it's mostly because of elderly people having heart attacks, so it's bewildering to me that they co-signed this. But he survived, and it's the best marketing clip I've ever seen in my entire life. All the marketing worked too, let me tell you. This movie cost $10 million to make and yielded $104 million in the box office. However, the audience response kind of affirmed my belief in the dead internet conspiracy. Because what do you mean the audience score is 88% on Rotten Tomatoes? What do you mean?
What do you mean? What do you mean?
The 32% critical score, totally understand. I guess maybe because it's like a little bit more broad, it's shot much more cinematically, so maybe it had a wider appeal, I guess. But if you talk to any Saw fan in the world, choose one entirely at random, I guarantee you that Jigsaw is not their favorite of the franchise. Or even their second or third or fourth favorite. The critical score is whatever, but I thought that I could at least have faith in the audience scores on Rotten Tomatoes. On Letterboxd, it has a 2.4, so someone's lying. That would translate to about a 45 to 50% score on Rotten Tomatoes, so I don't even think that's a conspiracy. I think we simply have enough evidence to suggest that there is some bullshit afoot. A marginally better entry into the franchise. You know what? Real. All the other responses are typical lazy rehashes of like old critical Saw reviews, so f that. Let's see what the good people of YouTube brought to the table.
Because I was hoping that they would have a film 7 years later with more of a reason to exist beyond let's make another Saw movie, because this really does follow the specific formula that the sequels have invented for the Saw films. But it tries to please the people who really enjoy the gorier aspects of the sequels as well as the psychological aspects of the first. There isn't really anything new here.
That review came out in 2017, and at that time, Chris Stuckman was already a pretty big name in the movie reviewing space, so I feel like it's fair to assume that his opinion reflects the masses. In my experience in talking talking about this franchise on my channel, most people don't really have any real feelings about this movie unless it's distaste. I personally agree with Chris in that it's fine, it's just not inspired at all and very clearly doesn't feel like it has a reason to exist. That might not be true for the next and potentially weirdest entry of the franchise.
It's a strange thing to sort of create a movie and then watch it go off into the wilderness without you.
Yes, it's time to talk about Spiral, which is the only true spin-off from the Book of Saw, the only movie of the franchise to not star Tobin Bell. But we do see some familiar faces behind the camera, including Darren Lynn Bousman, who returned to direct. You may remember that he was decidedly done with the franchise after Saw 4, so why did he return?
Chris Rock was what brought me back. I mean, obviously I'm a fan of the franchise, but I thought they'd been there and done that. But then all of a sudden you see someone like Chris Rock come in and said he's a fan of the franchise and wants to do one, then of course I would come back. I mean, he is probably the world's greatest living comedian.
According to Chris, he was in Brazil at some friend's wedding and the head of Lionsgate was there, so he approached them and he said this.
And I just posed a question to the head of Lionsgate. Do you ever think about putting somebody funny in one of those movies?
I was on a location scout for this movie and I got a phone call from one of the guys at Lionsgate who's a friend of mine. When he told me about Chris Rock, I thought back to a couple of years ago. I was at a film festival party at the Palm Springs Film Festival and my agent, much to my horror, pushed me towards Chris Rock and was like, say hi to Chris. I think I said something lame like, I'm a big fan. And he hears that 100 times a day, so he was like, okay. And as he was walking away, his agent said to him, that guy wrote Saw. And he like stopped in his tracks, came back and was like, you wrote Saw? And suddenly he was super interested. And he said to me, I would love to make a Saw film. And I thought it was just something that you say at a party, you know, like, hey, I'd love to dye my hair pink too. You just say it because the person's got pink hair, you don't want to make them feel bad. Turns out, he was serious.
Anyway, in his Fandango interview, he talked about why he wanted to do a Saw movie in the first place. He told his agents that he wanted to start taking on more serious roles, and this was part of that, especially concerning the subject matter of this movie, which is concerning police corruption. This is in the wake of the BLM movement in 2020, which is wild to consider that they wrote and shot this a year prior to those events taking place. Because of COVID, they sat on the movie for over a year before it was released. I wish that during press, more people asked about that subject matter, but hardly anyone brought it up. Chris Rock was more often asked about the fact that Samuel L. Jackson stars in the film. Apparently, Chris Rock was in charge of the comedy, while Darren Lynn Bousman was in charge of the traps, and neither really got in the other's way. But Darren, because he didn't want to retread the past, had several new directions that he wanted to explore with this film.
I think that Saw needed, I don't want to call it, it's not a reboot, it's not a sequel, it's its own thing, it's a standalone movie. But I think that it needed this Chris Rock kind of touch, which is not only the comedy, but let's say the first 8 films, I watched a couple of them the last couple of days. I was doing this tweet-a-thon thing.
I was reading along.
And I haven't seen these in so long. And they're fucking complicated and dense and interwoven with mythology that if you miss one of the movies, you're kind of not going to get the same thing out of the next one you see. And I think there needed to be that reset button for the audience to basically say, it's okay if you haven't seen Saw 1 through 8. This is elevated to a different level. When you have these type of people in the film, I think you watch the movie differently and it just feels bigger.
I appreciate that he wanted to bring a fresh energy to this franchise, but what he just said kind of discounts the cast that built this franchise. I understand and empathize with what he's saying, it just came off kind of callous. Because he had good ideas to freshen things up. For example, he didn't want to go back to that standard green look of the Saw films, but he still wanted to give it a stylistic flair because, and I agree with this, he thought that Jigsaw was too polished. So he decided that the movie should be set during the hottest week of summer, which I think stylistically is a cool choice, but didn't really add anything. Where I may start to question his methods is where he started to look for a new cinematographer to work with.
One of the things when I came back on, one of the very first things is I said that as much as I love working with David Armstrong, who was the original cinematographer, I said we had to go different on this one. I wanted this to have a younger, fresher look. And so this is a crazy story. I was sitting in my office and we did not have a DP. I have a playlist. the YouTube playlist of just my favorite music videos. And I literally looked up, and it was a Drake video for God's Plan. And I just loved the video. I love the way it was shot. And I was like, who is the DP of this? And ironically, just complete happenstance, he happened to be a Canadian DP living 2 blocks from the soundstage that we were at.
Did not have that one on my research bingo card. The only other behind the scenes insight that really captured my interest was the casting of Samuel L. Jackson, who I have to admit is obviously the biggest star to ever grace the screen of this franchise. He didn't do any press for this movie because, in the words of Chris Rock, it takes a very large paycheck to convince him to do anything. That's the reason why Chris Rock said that he might be cast.
And I remember they said, what do you think about Sam? I'm like, well, whatever you have to do to get Sam, greatest actors to ever live. Whatever you have to do, you know, except take my money. No, you can take my money.
Sam Jackson would not have come on board if it were not for Chris Rock. All the props go to Chris Rock for Sam Jackson coming on board.
It's refreshing that Chris Rock is humble about this, or maybe he doesn't even know. I would certainly want the bragging rights, but like I said, he insists that Samuel L. Jackson came on because of the big check. I think that, again, both can be true, and it's amazing to me that he came on board for this film at all. The two of them, two of probably the biggest stars to ever be in this franchise, were not enough of an allure to get the audience to come see this one, though. We have to consider the context of the pandemic, though. This came out in May of 2021. Things were far from normal in the movie theater world. In fact, they were kind of just reopening. We were still masked up, we were not seeing friends often, immunocompromised people were not leaving the house. Consider that context when you have this movie that cost $20 million, the most expensive Saw movie to date, and it went on to gross only $40.6 million in the box office. And that's worldwide, that's not just the domestic total. Granted, it was the biggest departure from the original series, and it was a bad movie, so that's also a factor, but even with a 37% score, that's tied for the 4th highest critical rating of the franchise with the same score as Saw 2. And yes, there are only about 1,000 audience ratings, but it's a 75%. Who is paying these people off? It has a 2.1 on Letterboxd, so you know what? I think dead internet theory confirmed. What the hell is a Book of Saw? Valid. Both times that I've ranked this franchise, people put that movie at either dead last or second to last, generally in their rankings. Basically, 3D, Jigsaw, and Spiral all kind of rotate at the bottom for people, but you know what? Claudia says it best. Here you have really good actors and a really mediocre movie. And guess who made a review of this movie back in May of 2021? A review that is now 2.5 years old, so yes, one might consider that a historical text.
Today, as you saw, I will be reviewing Spiral from the Book of Saw that was just released a couple of days ago. Were you excited about Spiral? Because I sure was. Unfortunately though, as a lot of the reviews are starting to come in, the movie is just, it's not very good.
That's the crux of the review, my thesis if you will. And that review was not as bad as I thought it was gonna be. I was in my braces era, so that's not great, but I thought it was gonna be way more cringy than it was, considering I was only 21 at the time. Check it out, she makes good points. Given the reception of the movie and the negative reaction by fans, the low box office, I mean obviously they decided not to continue in the direction of Spiral. Instead reverting back to what we know best. With that, we can conclude the weird reboot chapter of this video and get back to the good shit.
It all starts with the writing. And the script for this particular film is very strong, perhaps one of the strongest Saw films. Josh Stolberg and Pete Goldfinger did a marvelous job, and when I first read the script, I was very impressed with it. It was in very, very good shape, very tight. The casting has been wonderful, so we have a good film here.
So true, bestie. Saw X just recently released a few months ago, and honestly, it changed the world. I wish that we got more interviews with Kevin Greutert where he got to kind of talk about why he came back to the franchise, but the only people that ever get asked that are especially Tobin Bell, like it's mostly him, and then a few of the other actors, and the answers are exactly the same as they were for the Jigsaw press tour. I'm telling you that he is John Kramer. But Kevin did get to talk about some of the intentionality of the film.
And we always want to outdo ourselves, both within the film as the story progresses, but also in terms of the franchise as a whole, but then also not get too big. I think in some of the Saws are, you know, we're like, what if we put a motorcycle on top of the, you know, and there's all kinds of crazy, and it's cool to look at, but then you think of you know, 1 or 2 people putting this together, and it's a little bit silly, so we tried to scale back while still being very intense.
I think that this was a really good approach, back to basics. I mean, you can't always go bigger and better. In terms of scale, this movie was perfect, especially considering that in the timeline it takes place between the first and second films. And one could argue they did go bigger considering the traps. Well, maybe not bigger, but certainly grosser. There are a few BTS videos online, but they don't really get into the making of the traps. Kevin did reveal that a lot of them required using visual effects to accomplish, and so maybe that's why. That being said, unfortunately not going to focus on the disgusting traps so much as I am the interview insights.
I think Tobin was really impressed by how much this story truly immerses itself in his character, in his emotional journey. You know, it's almost as though the creators realized that it was a big mistake to make a Saw film with no John Kramer and no Tobin in it whatsoever.
Exactly that, Kevin, and they also realized that they should bring back the guy that directed Saw 6. But this time, don't force him to shoot it in 3D and just let him do his thing. Because when Kevin does his thing, we get the very best of the franchise. And what constitutes the best of the franchise? In my opinion, I think that it's whenever we get a lot of the John and Amanda relationship, which Tobin Bell and Shawnee Smith agree with.
I think what John likes about her is that he's been able to corral her and pull her in and get her to use her amazing strength and energy in a more focused way. Shawnee Smith developed the character at the beginning, Saw 1. When they cast her in the role that she's cast in, I took one look at her and I was like, oh my God, she is perfect. And she has been.
Can we also get some snaps for the fact that they didn't de-age people at all? If anything, Tobin Bell is selling 60-year-old with cancer better than he was 20 years ago. The secret? Actually being 80 years old. Not to mention that Shawnee Smith is still so hot in her 50s. I mean, we all know that people get more attractive as they age. So thank God they didn't do anything to de-age her. They were just like, the audience can suspend their disbelief. And we did. We were happy to do so. We also got these incredible new characters from a wonderful new cast, with Cecilia stealing the show if we're being real.
The relationship between John and Cecilia intensifies during the movie or throughout the movie. Cecilia is not one of his ordinary victims, so to speak. She challenges him. She questions his whole code. She manipulates him. She tries to break him.
I adore that she was the final girl of this film. It leaves so much open for her future with getting revenge on John and Amanda. Amanda was the best match for John in terms of an accomplice, but I think he finally found his equal with Cecilia. Just in terms of how well the two of them craft and execute the most fucked up plans you've ever heard of. They're like the same person, just with different motives and an opposite moral compass. Now, not to discredit Hoffman, because I love him too. I lost my shit at that end credit scene, and some people had already left the theater. Let's get some insight from Costas.
We're going to be sat here today. Saw 10's just come out, and you started on Saw 3.
It's funny because the years have gone by a little bit, and there was a bit of a hiatus, but to be called back in, and I thank the producers very much to include me, and now the potential is they might do another one, and you never know what, I might have more juice. It's nice to see that people are reacting to me in this one. Now, I can say it now, couldn't say it before, but you know, when I come on screen, people are like screaming, which is great for me, and I thank you all for that. But you know what, hopefully I'll be a part of the next one.
He's also not the only one that loves the fans. Remember I shared the clip earlier of Tobin Bell just talking about his reverence for the fans, and Shawnee Smith is the same way.
This has been so many years now of conventions and meeting the fans of Amanda. There are like generations of them now. I just started calling them this past year the tribe of Amandas because they're very similar. They're all super smart and super like tender-hearted but strong, and they connect with each other, and I love them so much, and I love Amanda, and it's like I never would have thought that I could come back 18 years later and like, because I do, like I hold all of them and her in my heart. I get to come back and like sing a love song to these young women.
Proud Tribe of Amanda member here. I mean, what she represents to people is really important. She is a person that overcame addiction. She's someone who feels deep empathy for people, even if it means that she has to rebel against Jigsaw to help some of the victims. She's this really twisted and yet sympathetic character. It's hard not to fall for her. This was the movie that Saw fans deserved. It's just all about the characters, and honestly, it always has been. They just finally get their true spotlight now. Now, the reception to this movie, you probably already know because it just came out, unless you're watching this from the future. Love that for you. Prior to a wide release, it premiered at Midsummer Screen Festival, and that's where the hype really first began.
Shawnee Smith returned to the series because, I mean,
how great is that?
Such a fan favorite, and practically steals the movie, which is crazy because Tobin Bell is amazing.
We were down at Midsummer Scream,
and we showed the trailer, and then when she took the mask off, people screamed like it was an overtime goal or a touchdown or something. People went bananas when Shawnee came back on. So it kind of validated our idea that she was integral and that she's a huge fan favorite.
Yeah, like I just said, it's all about the characters and always has been. Fans wanted to know where Dr. Gordon went literally after the first movie. They begged for years. The return of Shawnee, I want to imagine being in that theater. I could only imagine it's exactly like being in a Nottingham pub when England scores a goal against Denmark. Those people go crazy for football. And the hype only built from there. It has the highest critical and audience score on Rotten Tomatoes, and that I can believe. It's thoroughly unpleasant, but that's rather the point. Saw X wipes that silliness out, positioning itself as a direct sequel to Saw and presenting a singular, streamlined story of revenge that works from a clear channel of logic. Previous reboots both failed to grasp Kramer's star power. Saw X does not make that mistake, leading to one of the franchise's strongest installments since the original, mostly because it gives Jigsaw center stage. All that and more. Love to see it. Maybe we can attribute this to attitudes shifting in general. Since the release of Get Out in 2017, I mean, that was a cultural reset. It was released the same year, and audiences have truly never been the same. Horror is mainstream like it never has been before, and I feel like it's only grown since the pandemic, with people reinvigorating their love of the genre. Hell, I even started my channel because I was stuck in the house bored. I think that's partially why Saw X was given more favorable treatment, but just in terms of quality, I think that it is definitively the best of the franchise. Do I personally like Saw 6 more and consider Saw 6 a more perfect film? Yes. But in terms of just like objective quality, I think that it's undoubtedly on top. Also, believe it or not, this cost only $13 million to produce, where Spiral cost $20 million, and again, I'm like, how? But also bear in mind that that's with inflation. The movie also went on to gross over $100 million in the box office and completely reinvigorated the fandom. That may be due to some genius marketing, including turning Billy the puppet into a slut. That's right, he was caught cheating on Annabelle with Chucky. The news swept Twitter, it shocked fans. They also ran a customized AMC ad with Billy parodying the iconic Nicole Kidman one. Whatever intern came up with that deserves a raise. As far as the future of the franchise goes, these are the only little nuggets that we have so far.
We don't talk about the future until a movie opens, so we'll meet the Monday after opening weekend, and should this movie work, we kind of left it open-ended to where we can continue.
You could either come back immediately following Saw 10, or you could do a Saw 7 follow-up, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, you know what? I think they're going to follow the track that they're on right now, but I really do believe there's a magical way to get out of that bathroom.
Okay, go girl, give us nothing. I also sleuthed in search of articles that might reveal any interviews or plans for a Saw XI, but I didn't really find anything. They haven't been able to really get anything out of producers or Kevin Greutert either. So unfortunately, that is where I leave you. Wow! I can't believe that after months and months of teasing this deep dive, of researching and writing a script that turned out to be 37 pages, it's finally all over. This video could have been twice as long. I mean, there's 10 movies in the franchise, so I had to boil it down. Gotta stick to the highlights, people. So if you're curious to know more, again, like I said, I do have the master resource post listed down below as always. I always encourage doing your own research, especially if you saw anything that piqued your interest. I highly recommend watching the interviews in their entirety. Let me know the most shocking thing that you learned today, or let me know your favorite unhinged marketing moment. I love the Billy scandals as of late, but I think that Tobin Bell going through the maze has to take the cake. But let me know any of your questions, comments, concerns down below. Don't be shy. If you made it this far, you are one of my favorite maggots. Why don't we, let's try to confuse the people that didn't make it this far. Okay, comment down below and compliment my ascot. People will be looking in the comments like, what is she, Fred fucking Jones? And then they'll be like, wait, she's not even wearing an ascot. I just think that that would be fun. Also, if you made it to the end of this video and you're not subscribed yet, then what are we even doing here? Click that button and let me devour your soul. Or if I haven't convinced you yet, then maybe check out some of my other content. I have a lot of deep dives on my channel. I think the one that pairs best with this one is probably my James Wan deep dive, so have at it. More than anything, I just hope that you enjoyed this video and that I catch you in the next one. Bye!